When Eleanor's parents embarked on a week-long trip, it felt almost too familiar. They trusted her to care for the house, and of course, for Julian, her father's best friend's son. Julian was 19, technically younger, but practically her peer. After his parents moved abroad, he'd become a semi-permanent part of their family. Eleanor had always called him her little brother, a comfortable, teasing title they'd both grown accustomed to. But this time, things felt subtly different. The first day of her parents' absence, the house seemed unusually still. Eleanor entered the kitchen that morning to find Julian already preparing breakfast, sleeves pushed up, expertly flipping pancakes with a focused intensity she'd never quite registered before. He offered her a plate with a warm smile, no words needed. Eleanor chuckled, playfully remarking on his sudden display of maturity. He held her gaze a moment longer than usual. Or maybe, he suggested softly, you've simply never truly seen me. She dismissed it with a light-hearted smirk, but his tone lingered in her thoughts. That evening, Eleanor relaxed on the sofa, idly scrolling through her phone when Julian settled beside her, closer than their typical casual proximity. They watched a movie, and without conscious thought, Eleanor found herself leaning her head against his shoulder. She rationalized it as an innocent gesture, something they'd done countless times before. Yet, the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, heightened her awareness of every point of contact between them. When she shifted slightly, he adjusted in tandem, his hand coming to rest gently over hers. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't withdraw her hand. It was late when they finally stirred to head to their respective rooms. At the top of the stairs, he paused, his expression enigmatic. "Good night, Elle," he said, his voice a low murmur, tinged with uncertainty. "Good night, Julian," she replied quickly, turning towards her room. The next morning, Eleanor awoke earlier than usual. Passing by Julian's room, she noticed his door was slightly ajar. She peeked inside. He was still asleep, his face serene, arms flung over his pillow. She lingered for a moment, captivated by a sudden rush of tenderness, before moving on, slightly shaken. Later that day, they cooked dinner together. He stood close behind her, guiding her hands as she chopped vegetables, his chest lightly brushing against her back. Her breath hitched, but she didn't create any distance. She allowed the contact. She wasn't sure why. That night, lying in bed, Eleanor stared at the ceiling, grappling with the unfamiliar sensations stirring within her. He had always been a constant presence, unfailingly kind, always ready with a witty remark. But she'd never experienced this pull. She reflected on the way his eyes tracked her now, the comfortable silences that held a newfound weight. It wasn't a heavy silence, but rather a pregnant one, filled with unspoken words and burgeoning feelings. She closed her eyes, telling herself she was imagining things, misinterpreting innocuous gestures. But deep down, she knew that something fundamental had shifted. And it wasn't solely him. It was her, too. The third night was marked by a steady, rhythmic rain. The sound enveloped the house, a soft yet persistent drumming, and the lights flickered before succumbing to darkness. Eleanor lit a cluster of candles and called out to him. He emerged from his room, the hood of his sweatshirt pulled up, and a smile graced his lips as he saw her seated at the dining table, the candlelight dancing between them. "How romantic," he teased, and she rolled her eyes. But the word resonated within her, settling in a place deep inside. They talked for what felt like hours. No phones, no distractions, just the two of them. He reminisced about when they'd first met, how she used to cajole him into doing her chores. Eleanor laughed. "You were such a quiet kid," she said. He shrugged. "Maybe I just enjoyed listening to you." His response gave her pause. She was momentarily speechless. So, she simply gazed at him. He didn't break eye contact. Then, without preamble, he posed a question. Have you ever felt like someone was right in front of you the whole time and you were completely oblivious to their presence? Her heart skipped a beat. The intensity of his gaze, gentle yet unwavering, was impossible to dismiss. "Why are you asking me this, Julian?" she whispered. He offered no direct answer, only that familiar, enigmatic smile he wore when he had more to say, but chose restraint instead. Later, Eleanor went to the kitchen for a glass of water. He followed her in. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, merely charged. As she turned to leave, he reached out, his fingers gently encircling her wrist. Not a forceful grip, not a hurried touch, but just enough to halt her. She looked up at him. His hand remained there, as did hers. She wanted to articulate something, but the words eluded her. They stood there for a suspended moment. Then he released her, and she walked away, her heart pounding, her mind racing. That night, sleep was a distant visitor. She tossed and turned, replaying his words, the way he'd looked at her, the undeniable warmth in his eyes. It was disorienting, yes, but also strangely comforting. She wasn't afraid. There was no sense of wrongness. She simply didn't know the trajectory of their feelings or the implications of this shift. But she couldn't deny that an unspoken understanding had taken root between them, and neither of them seemed inclined to conceal it any longer. The next morning, Julian knocked on her door before she was fully awake. He brought her tea, remarking that she looked tired. She thanked him, and when their fingers brushed as she accepted the cup, neither of them recoiled immediately. He offered no explanation, simply turned and walked away, that half-smile playing on his lips once more. Eleanor sat there, cradling the warm mug, her fingers still tingling from his fleeting touch. They didn't address the undercurrent directly, but every glance carried more weight. Every word seemed imbued with a deeper resonance. The atmosphere between them was no longer merely familiar. It was electric. They shared laughter, engaged in conversation, but beneath the surface, a subtle melody played. Something was evolving, and they were both acutely aware of it. They simply hadn't given it a name. The days that followed saw a continuation of this altered dynamic. Julian was no longer just another presence in the house. He occupied her thoughts constantly, infiltrating quiet moments, influencing the way she began to perceive everything about him. The curve of his smile, the soothing timbre of his voice, the uncanny way he always anticipated her needs without a word. There was no more room for pretense. Every exchange was laden with meaning. Every shared look lingered a fraction longer. That afternoon, music drifted from his room, a soft, languid melody, something old and evocative. Drawn by an irresistible curiosity, Eleanor ventured in, and he offered his hand without a word. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then placed her fingers in his. He gently drew her towards him, and they swayed together slowly, almost tentatively. Initially, Eleanor couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze, apprehensive of the emotions it might reveal. But when she finally did, there was no turning back. She witnessed the depth of his sincerity. She felt the steady, strong rhythm of his heartbeat through his shirt. He rested his hand on the small of her back, not in a possessive way, but simply grounding. Words were superfluous. The silence spoke volumes. Her heart felt as though it was racing to catch up with the undeniable truth her body already knew. She wasn't afraid. Confusion had given way to clarity. They stopped dancing, but remained close. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers barely skimming her skin. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. "You feel it too, don't you?" he murmured, his voice barely audible. Eleanor simply nodded. It was the only response she could manage in that moment. Words seemed inadequate to capture the complexity of what she felt. They settled onto a nearby sofa, side by side, their arms touching. He reached for her hand slowly, as if seeking silent permission. She didn't resist. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they were destined to fit together. He gazed at their joined hands, then lifted his eyes to meet hers. "I've never seen you as a sister, Elle," he confessed quietly. "Not even once." Eleanor's breath hitched, but she didn't recoil. "I know, Julian," she whispered. The room seemed to shrink, the world outside to fade away. There was no grand pronouncement, no dramatic declaration, just a profound, peaceful recognition. It was astonishing how something so nascent could feel so profoundly right, so deeply familiar. They didn't kiss. They didn't transgress any boundaries. But Eleanor knew that something significant had been communicated, a truth that couldn't be retracted. That night, she lay in bed, free from doubt. Clarity had emerged from the fog of confusion, and it wasn't frightening. She didn't concern herself with how others might label their connection. She understood her own feelings. She knew he reciprocated them. The bond they shared had undergone a transformation, but it hadn't been fractured. It had deepened, evolving into something warm, steadfast, and quietly powerful. She contemplated the days to come. She was uncertain of the path ahead, but for the first time she didn't fear the unknown. She was prepared to embrace whatever the future held as long as he was by her side.